Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the second week of AFL Weekly. Thanks for joining us again. We're joined this week by Nikki Scorpus and Rabman as well, who's going to carve up the joint, apparently. So we'll see how that goes. But without further ado, I'll hand it over to Scorpus for the evening's events. Take it away, Scorpus.
Yeah, thanks, Phoenix. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second episode for 2018 of this new Wednesday show that we've got going on. As Phoenix has said, we've got Nikki and one of the newbies in, so it'll be great to have a chat with three people, maybe four on this show tonight. A little bit different this week compared to last week for those who are listening. Last week we covered pretty much just AFLW. This week we're going to be doing about half and half between general AFL news to start with, and then later in the show we'll get into the match on the weekend and the upcoming match of the AFLW. So without further ado, Nikki, I believe there's a bit of Crows news tonight.
There has been a bit of Crows news, but it's going to be interesting to see how you guys think of this. For me, I'm not kind of that worried about it. So Captain Taylor Walker, he strained his plantar fascia. So that's not too bad. He's going to be in a moon boot for the next 2 weeks. They'll then build him back up again so that he'll be right for round one. So therefore, he's not going to play any AFLX and he's not going to play any JLT games. He probably wasn't going to play any AFLX anyhow because he's the wrong type of player for that.
Well, he shouldn't.
Yeah. And I don't think he's going to be that much of a loss really out of the JLT. That actually gives the other players a chance through there. He kind of knows how he plays. I think most of the team knows how he plays. Is he really that much of a loss out of there? We've got to get him right for round one. Isn't that what our whole focus is?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's always disappointing to see a player like Walker who's been fairly injured or at least, struggling with a few niggles over the last couple of years, hear that he's going to have another shortened preseason. But let's be honest, AFLX and the preseason JLT matches don't mean anything. So if he's not playing in them, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, and quite the fact that it's very interesting because I actually got to go on a tour of the club tonight, and so Phil Harper took us through that, and he talked about the training last Monday that our team did, the men's team did up on the Gold Coast, and he said the Monday training they did was the most intense he has ever seen in his entire 20 years he's been at the club, and it was intense from start to go. So I wonder whether that was possibly where, Matt Haas, our general manager of high performance, actually said that he started to feel some strain last week. So I predict that's probably where it came from. That's such high intensity that it was being played at. So it's good that it happened then. It's been picked up and we're dealing with it to get him right for the main season.
Yeah, I mean, we'd heard, I think there's a couple of player reports as well saying that camp was particularly intensive. So yeah, I mean, there's one poster on Big Footy who was joking about this is pretty much this week is the exact week that the club likes to come out with all the preseason injuries that people have copped. Because, of course, before now, everyone's perfectly healthy. And then this week, everyone turns out, 3/4 of the list have injuries. So I wonder if we'll see a couple of other players come up, as you say, with potentially some other niggles and other things. Got anything to add to that, Rabman?
Watching him last season, it seemed like he was his foot. It seemed like it's something that's troubled him for a while. So, it's certainly you want to have this now, not in the season. So, disappointing news to hear, but you rather it now than later in the season.
Yeah, spot on. And I think it's a little layover a bit from the knee injury as well, because anybody who is coming back from a knee injury, you tend to compensate away from your knee. And so it's either ankles or feet where some issues come in. So I'm not kind of that worried about it, but we'll wait and see. If he's not ready for round one, it'll be like, So I think we need to move on to the dear old the leaked memo that came out today. So this is a bit of AFLW news, but this caused a hell of a stir once it came out. So for starters, which club leaked the memo? It was very interesting that you had a Brisbane player actually came out and absolutely slammed it, because quite specifically what they're targeting here is exactly the way that Brisbane plays. This is why Brisbane didn't lose a match last year, except for the grand final against us, and even that was a close run thing in the end. So that's kind of interesting what's going on there. Again, it's something that Phil Harper did talk about, because we did bring up the memo that was being leaked, and his impression is from the AFL is that they are kind of keen on this idea of zones in AFLW, and it is likely to come in future. And also,
have you seen the memo? Because they basically are saying that from next week they're going to have the umpires enforcing this 5-6-5 formation and some 15-metre protected area between stoppages and the goal. So I don't think it's next season. I think it's next week that they'll be implementing this.
Yeah, it's going to be the umpire. Well, the umpires aren't going to do anything except not start the game till they do it. But I think there will be more stricter penalties, etc., aligned with it when it's coming in next year. The other interesting thing he actually mentioned, so here's something new, is that the AFL are considering with the new teams that are coming in, what is likely to happen is they will get to test their conference idea that they've been keen on for a while. Therefore, they'll split it up into the two conferences instead of sending the women's season further back into January. They'll keep it at the time limit where they've got it now. The AFL really likes this this short number of season that they have leading into the men's season. So they'll do the two conferences, and then the winner of those two conferences will play off in the grand final once they get those extra teams on board. So that's a little something that the AFL we know has been keen on. Gillen's got a hell of a hard-on for the NFL system with their idea of the conferences, etc. And
did you say hell of a hard-on?
I really hate all this Americanization to the games. Just stand on our own 2 feet and do it our own way. I mean, honestly, not everything America does is better here. I mean, thank God we don't have the same gun laws, anything like that. So, I mean, did they were they specific in what teams in a certain conference, or is that still yet to be made?
No, I think that'll be yet to be made. We will get a dilution of the Melbourne teams as well, because what will happen is that the Melbourne teams, as they are currently, they'll actually have their players rated, and they will, like, for example, if their top player might be rated worth 50 points, and they will have to give 100 points to one of these new teams. So they will actually have to send a couple of their players that they have currently from their teams to the new teams. So that'll further dilute the strength of the Melbourne teams. So that's something I hadn't heard of before. But
that's interesting, because
I think we'll hear a bit more.
The Melbourne teams aren't exactly that strong right now. I mean, Melbourne's got a fairly good squad, and a couple of these teams are okay, but I would have thought that Collingwood is probably going to struggle again this season. So to dilute the sort of teams even further, it could be a real opportunity for these interstate teams like us and Brisbane and GWS that seem to be quite good to continue with their strength into the next season.
And I think what we've seen with the increase in football, that's the uptake in women. So 3 years ago, the registrations in South Australia, it was 1 woman in 42. It's now 1 in 8. So for every 8 players that's registered in South Australia to play football, one of those is a woman. That is an amazing uptick. And because you've got that pathway, we're actually going to see a lot more players, I think, come through South Australia. So one of our best players, of course, who was consideration for our squad, but because she was older at 36, she's headed off to go and play in GWS. Unfortunately, you don't earn a lot of money doing that. But just going back to this memo, I have an issue with it, that whole thing of like the 15-metre protected zone goal side of stoppages. What happens if there's a ball up 10 metres out in front? You generally do have your full forward sitting at that front part of the stoppage. I think
the whole thing's an absolute joke.
Yeah, it's the AFL coming up with these ideas and not actually thinking fully of the consequences. They have done this consistently. And the fact that they're getting the umpires to push this through, this is my bugbear. They need to get rid of the development umpires out of here. They should not be having them do this league. It actually needs to be the better umpires doing so. When you're trying to enforce these brand new rules that these umpires have never had to experience before. Yeah, but they're not
they say
used
they
to it.
require your support to put the following in place, and then they list all the things and basically say, we're going to have the umpires to do this. Well, I mean, let's be honest. First of all, they shouldn't be changing the rules mid-season of the AFLW competition or using it for, trialing out new things. That's just completely ridiculous. And then to then not even make these changes actual rules, but just saying we're going to use the umpires to half enforce it. Like, what are they actually on about here? This is complete and utter bullshit. Like the AFL is just making up crap on the fly.
Scorpus, have you met the AFL?
Well, they do it a lot, but this is just over the top compared to what we've seen before.
I mean, they've said that it's basically an initiative under the spirit of the game philosophy, and to me, that's just a big slap in the face. It's let the women play football the way football's intended, and let the game sort itself out.
Spot on. You actually had a couple of different styles of game. Yeah, you had the Carlton Collingwood game, which was that slogfest with numbers behind the ball and everything else. You had our game where you had a bit of that going on with Brisbane because that's the way Brisbane plays, but we were trying to break it open, etc. So you had a bit more attacking game plan up against the other one. And then you had the Melbourne, the GWS game, which was there were a lot of goals for this length of time kicked. So you actually had three different styles all over the one weekend. But the fact was that you had the main game on the Friday night between two teams who actually aren't really that good. Of course you're going to get a game like that.
Yeah, I think I see what I want to say about this. It just infuriates me, to be honest, that they're messing around with the women's competition like this. Like, we'd never see this kind of crap in the men's league with them basically completely changing the rules and saying how they want people to play and introducing zones a few rounds in. Like, it's just complete garbage.
Yep, agree.
Move on.
So let's move on to something much nicer, which is 10 new AFL Life members were announced today, which include Eddie Betts. Good old Eddie. But he's in some very good company here because there's Steve Johnson, Jordan Lewis, Cade Simpson, Andrew Mackey, and then you had Chris Dolan and Sean Ryan. So all of those players and umpires got in on the number of games played or umpired, etc. And then you had Mike Fitzpatrick, Michael Long and Rex Hunt, who came in under their services to football, etc. And then they had this award, which I'd never heard of before, which is the Jack Titus Award for Outstanding Service. And so that will be awarded to John Condon, who, of course, was the team manager of the Crows, particularly during the 97-98 years. But it's for his 60 years of service. Now, on the screen, it actually says it's for North Adelaide and the Adelaide Crows, but he was also a prospect. So he's at amateur level, at state level, and at the AFL level. So that is excellent recognition for John Condon.
Eddie Betts sounded well deserving of it. You know, you see all the kids around, they just inspire him. They just all gravitate to him anytime he goes out to the community areas and all that. That's what is most impressive about Ed, and that's why he's very deserving of it.
Yeah, even though he's gotten in, I mean, you compare him to Steve Johnston and Jordan Lewis. I'm pretty sure that Eddie would love to have the number of premiership medal along with like what those guys do. But I think Eddie just stands out so much more, as you said, Rapman, just by his infectious nature and how much he loves footy. I mean, there he was walking around to take his kids. He goes to every AFLW game that's played here, and his two boys are there with their Randall T-shirts on. And that's just, you know, he just supports footy. It doesn't matter what level it is. We've heard stories of him when he's, you know, supposedly on a rest day. So he just walks across the road from his house where there's an amateur footy club training and goes, can I join in? You know, and he joins in training with those guys. He just loves footy and he loves giving back to the community, as you said. So this is great recognition for him. And just hope we can get him a premiership medallion soon.
Yeah, can't add much more to that, Nikki. reckon we've got a couple more topics, don't we, to round out this new segment?
We do. This is a very interesting one. So whilst it says the Burnie Dockers fold, they're not technically folding, but they're not going to be playing in the Tasmanian State League. So it's not just Burnie, it's also Devonport. So both the northwestern side of Tasmania are formerly a very strong football area, but those teams just can't get players. They've been going out to social media trying to beg players to turn up. The AFL is spruiking about how great it is going in Tasmania, but it's going great in other areas and it's falling apart in one of the very traditional stronghold areas. And they've just named, I'm trying to remember the name of the guy, to their development area, and he used to be the CEO of Tasmania. Well, dude's stuffed up in this area, and yet you've put him in the development bit. But, oh, well, it's an AFL decision.
The two main issues are it's got to do, I reckon, with the social impact, but more importantly, the structure. The league, the TSL. And one of the big issues is that Adelaide or Perth, where the population's just right in the city, Tasmania is spread out right throughout, and mainly in Launceston and Hobart. It's 4-hour drive from Hobart. Teams in the league are from the Hobart area. So you can understand why it struggled to get players, because you've got to get that commitment to drive all the way to Hobart and back. I mean, what they need to do a North Conference or a South Conference structure and have more regional teams just playing in regional areas, because it's just not going to work. It's no wonder why they can't get the players.
Isn't that how Tassie used to be set up, with two comps in North and South? I'm sure it was back in the day.
I think it was.
Yeah, to me, this is a concern, as you pointed out earlier, before we went live here, Phoenix, that for such a stronghold area, that the fact that they're struggling for the numbers there. I mean, it could be a greater something, as Radman said, the fact that you've got less people in this kind of area, that they're moving away. So that needs to be taken into account as well. But I do like your idea that to make it two comps. If they've got this growth in numbers, then that might be the way they need to go.
Well, also the social impact is that less and less men between 20 and 34 are in Tasmania, growing or anything like that. So to get the right age bracket of men to play, areas like Burnie, their population's only 20,000, I think it was. So easy to get together. I mean, if you got Launceston's an hour and a half from Burnie, so it's very difficult for someone from Launceston to go and play for Burnie when it's an hour and a half drive. So.
Okay, now we need to move on to something that's apparently going to start next week, and do any of us really care? The AFLX.
All right, let's move on.
Do we really care? They're going to have silver balls. I just saw the bits of
what
them.
What are they doing?
Well, I looked at the launch, and there's acrobats. Why are there acrobats walking around Gillon? And then they had people dropping from the sky. What the hell is this supposed to be? I don't really care
and they got
about that.
Such stars as, didn't they get Sean Atley and Jack Billings to front it up? It's like, star power right there. Really going all out on this competition. It's just such a joke. I mean, we should be playing the 10 least likely players to get a game at AFL level. Can we put in like Brett Burton into our team and Matt Haas? We can load it up with our coaching stuff, because it's just a joke.
Yeah, Benny Jarman would be good at it.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, I just think you'd be playing a development players in it.
For me, it's a smart concept at the grassroots. I mean, since the women's league's come around, it's been a great boom in participation. About the issue with access to ovals, probably not going to be as big of an issue in the southern states, but in the northern states, where there's a bit of an oppression to Australian football, that is a bit of a issue the AFL's got. So I can see this concept working well up there. Pressure. but I don't buy it whatsoever.
I do think it was there was a nice little slap in the face towards Port, which we always like on this podcast, when Gillen talked about how they can go to Hong Kong and they can play a game there in November and they can send a special team over. Like, seriously, which AFL team's actually going to allow you to take their players, or will the AFLPA allow you to take players up there that you want when they're actually during their mandatory break? Of course not, dipshits. See, AFL, you're making me swear.
It doesn't make sense as an international game because where overseas can you buy an Australian rules football? Like, it doesn't matter that there's like square ovals everywhere. If you can't actually get the game ball readily available, no one's going to play it. It's just stupid.
I actually do know where you can buy one. It's the big sports stores in Italy. They have everything. And I actually did see one in there. So you can get them. I don't think anybody was buying them, but you can get them. The other thing is that it leads into is it's a very amusing slap in the face to Port, because they talked about how they can play it in Hong Kong and they don't have to pay for infrastructure like they had to for Shanghai. Yeah, Port, AFL aren't going to support you anymore into China because that sucked. And just to end on a very, very amusing thing that happened, somebody that's a favourite of many South Australian radio listeners. Why people still listen to him, I don't know, except I think it's a hate thing and they like yelling at the radio whilst they're driving along in the car, is that Kane Corns had a go at Carlton for their 8-person leadership group, and he had a go about how that's too many players, and he also had a go that you don't put players into your leadership group who just come into your club. Next minute, Port name a 7-man leadership group, so one less, and Rockcliffe is in there. Yeah. Whoopsies, Kane, you shouldn't open your big mouth once again. So if we were doing cockwombling nominates, he would get a hell of a nomination.
Attention seeker is the best word to describe him.
Yeah, he's a flog. But I mean, have you seen this leadership group? It could be the worst leadership group in the AFL. With so they've got Travis Spoke, who's amazingly still managed to be captain of their team. They've got Ollie Wines.
Else?
Well, apparently Ollie Wines, but he's probably not going to be there. But
Has he signed yet?
They've got Ebert, who is incredibly mediocre. They've got Hamish Hartlett, who they've tried to get rid of a couple of years ago. They've got known thug Tom Jonas. They've got Charlie Dixon, bit of a knob, and also Tom Rockcliffe, who likes to make players drink their own piss. So just such a quality group of individuals there that will be leading Port Adelaide this season.
Yeah, I only found out about it this afternoon, and they gave me a lovely fit of giggles. So thank you, Port Adelaide.
All right, I think that wraps up the news, Nikki. I think we've covered it all. So let's move to talking about the AFL Women's and our game against Brisbane on Saturday. So we ended up losing this match, unfortunately, going down 3 goals, 1-19 to 4 goals, 7-31. We only managed to score in the second quarter of the match. So the other 3 quarters, we didn't score even a single behind. And I'll leave my thoughts to after you guys have spoken, but I thought we were very disappointing.
Just on that scoring part, for people who weren't at the ground, there was a very strong breeze for 3 quarters to the northern end. So you saw with the first 2 shots on goal from Eloise Jones and Sarah Perkins that they actually missed, that wind just pushed it out. And you also have to look at the fact that the Lions only scored towards that end in their quarter. They only scored a point as well until that last quarter when the wind died off, and they then really did commence their flooding. So that does have to come into it, but we made poor decisions. Particularly, we got a bit too flustered in kicking out to the side, and because of that breeze, how many out in the falls were there? And that showed you what that breeze was like. There was one stage we were actually kicking towards the southern end. We got a nice break. did one of her nice long kicks, and the ball was going to the player, and then it just literally came straight down. Just that wind just kind of hit it. It was ridiculous.
The slide that's up at the moment, Nikki. That was a telling factor in the game. Look at those contested marks and marks inside 50 numbers.
Yes. Where that comes down to, I think, is a lot of those contested marks were the forward area or in the defensive area. And so that's a lot of people were talking about how we missed Erin so much. For me, Courtney Cremery is a huge loss out of that back line because she does a lot of those contested marks. But the other one who also does those contested intercept marks, etc., is Randall. And because we had Erin out, that meant she had to go into the midfield. So we essentially actually lost two generals down back. For me, the other one is also the handball stats about how many more Brisbane have the handballs because they flick it around and flick it around and flick it around and flick it around because they do that tight congestion. They keep moving it till they can get that breakout in space, whereas we play a bit more traditional. We don't get as many numbers into the ball. And they, because they had those numbers when we did kind of get it out a bit, they were able to pressure very effectively quite quickly. I was really surprised at the tackle numbers, considering that Marinoff didn't have very many tackles because she was actually the get ball herself she had to do, when normally she's the one doing the blocks and doing the tackles to help out the other midfielders. She didn't do too badly in that type of role. But, yeah, this 1%ers was that surprised me.
Have a look at the inside 50s.
Oh, the inside 50s were just ridiculous. So we did quite well rebounding and only keeping him to that score. Seriously.
Yeah, I think there was a number of issues with the way we played. I mean, I think we had a lot of trouble, not only just reading the ball, but just being in the right positions in a lot of areas on the ground, particularly in defence where we just seemed to, a lot of our defenders, and it's probably because we were a bit undermanned back there, but just were too far away from the players that were just freely marking the ball. And then conversely, in our forward 50, we did have some marking opportunities, but it was just, it was almost marks, a lot of almost marks, grabbing it right in the fingertips and just fluffing it a little bit. If some of those had come off in sort of the way Frederick Traub was doing it, then we could have had a number of extra shots on goal that we just unfortunately didn't get. And I think as well, we struggled a lot with our tempo and our ability to control the ball when we got those fast breaks. We love to play on and have that really fast ball movement, but just at times we were making really poor decisions after we got clear, and that made it very, very difficult to actually execute going inside 50. So I think there's certainly a number of things that we can clean up going into next week. And obviously, you know, we should be getting a couple of our best 22 players back in McCormick and hopefully Abby Holmes as well, who I thought were quite good last season. So it should be good to get those two back, whereas unfortunately Phillips and Cramey won't be available. So, you know, I guess when you consider having those four best 22 players out of a team that really relies on star power, you know, we weren't absolutely obliterated, but, you know, we did definitely miss those players.
Well, yeah, I mean, you take out Frederick Traub and actually Zilke out of that Lions team, or would they have won that game? And I think the question then would actually possibly be no. That's what we talked about last week, is you rely so much on not getting injuries that it had such an impact last season, and we've seen it again this season. Just after one round, yep, here's the proof that it's getting as many of your good players on the park as you can. Now, interesting for Frederick Traub, she's injured. She's still marking like she did that, and yes, she deserved those 10 votes, but she could have killed us so much more, but she can't kick the distance. She was pulling every single kick. She was not going for it. And we didn't figure that out quick enough. We were setting up for how fast she normally kicks, and she was doing the short ones every time, because she actually can't kick that far at the moment. So she's definitely got an injury going on there.
I think we also struggle a lot without Phillips in the midfield. I was really hoping this season that with a couple of our added players in the forward line like Wallace and Jones, that we'd be able to play Phillips mostly in the centre. Obviously, she was injured, so we couldn't play her, because And we could see the effect of that this week. There's just a lot of our mid-tier to sort of, second rotation, third rotation midfielders that simply weren't getting enough of the football. You look at players like Sally Riley, who apparently was playing in the midfield, only had 3 touches of the ball. You look at other players like, Sophie Armistead, who came in as a late emergency, had 6 touches. Sedgenary had 7 touches, Lug had 7 touches, Bevan 7 touches. And admittedly, the AFLW matches are a lot shorter than the men's game, so we can't, compare normal numbers that we're used to seeing from the men's game. But really, we should be pushing those second-tier rotation midfielders into the, low teens type possessions, the 10 to 14 touches. And we can see from the Brisbane stats that, they had a lot more players getting those sort of disposal numbers, and that's really something that we need to work on, I guess, at getting those, second rotation midfielders up to the ball-winning ability that they need to be at.
Yeah, I'm spot on with the numbers. I was going to say that I would, for a good game for those type of players, was around the 14 mark is what you'd be looking for, and it's your top-tier players, your real accumulators who get in the 20s and the low 20s. Lug was an interesting one. I think she did some nice things, but my impression from being at the ground is that it was obvious that she's missed a bit of football. So she was kind of getting herself in the right place, but not quite quick enough, if you know what I mean. You could tell that she was just that little off the boil. So hopefully by next week she does pick it up. But it was very interesting how you actually saw Randall instinctively was going to play to her almost every time because they have played for so many years. She knew where she was going to be. So I think that could be an interesting combination if Rianne can just pick up that game a little bit quicker. Riley's an interesting one because normally we do play her off the half-back line, so I think it was a bit of an unusual thing for her to go into the midfield, and she did struggle. She struggled very much so. I didn't mind Metcalf and Jess Allen's game. I actually thought they did quite okay for the ruck. Unlike you've often seen many other rucks, they will always tap exactly the same spot. The Brisbane players figured out very quickly that their ruck was not going to win against these guys, so they started setting up and trying to rove, particularly against Metcalf. And the very next time, she was just like, yep, nope, not happening. And she made sure she tapped it in the other directions. And Jess Allen, she's got great timing on it. She was thumping that ball well away from the congestion. So we were trying to make some changes there. It just wasn't quite coming off. The problem going into our forward line for me was the whole thing is the midfielders, obviously they have quite a direction not to go in there and clog it up. But with Brisbane flooding their players in, that's where they were chopping off the leads. Perkins was having to deal with 2 players for the majority of the time. And it was the midfielders, that lack of nous there, so to speak, I think is where it really let down, because there's only 2 goals in the end. So to hold Brisbane to that, with who we had out, and we didn't play well, that's actually not too bad.
I mean, there were plenty of there were a good 5 or 6 players that I thought were quite good. So it was definitely as was usually the case for these AFLW matches, that the star power at the top really does come out. And Chelsea Randall I thought was really good. Marinoff was pretty standard game for her, and Van Hagen as well, who has been showed last season that she's a very, very capable outside player and will be one of our best wings throughout the season. And I was very impressed as well with Dana Cox, who I thought throughout last season was just a bit of a okay, I guess, player, or someone to make the team and fill out the numbers. But she played a great game, I thought, and Ruth Wallace on debut as well. There's a lot to work with there, and certainly was probably one of our best players on debut, which is no easy feat in AFLW.
Jones was a little bit out of it, but that first goal she kicked that's vintage Jones. That's what she can do.
Showed her potential for sure.
Yes, and it was quite good because in that last quarter when Brisbane were trying to exploit it and they were putting all their players up forward, she was making sure her player was not getting the ball. So the fact that she was running hard defensively, I was quite pleased to see as well. And that's not something you would pick up on the vision, etc. But she was working very hard that way. So that's great from a forward that they're not going to slack off, particularly in their first game. Ruth Wallace was actually introduced to us before the tour tonight, and she's only just realised she played an AFLW game on the weekend. It's just kind of finally hit her. So I thought that was kind of a little lovely thing that she's still riding high on, oh my God, I've got to play this game that she never thought she was going to be able to do.
Yeah, that sort of stuff's fantastic, and it's good to see players like that, really cherishing their opportunity to play a sport that's basically just appeared and has given these players opportunity. I think in the last couple of minutes here, we've probably got about 5 minutes to talk about the upcoming game. Next round 2, of course, we're playing Melbourne at Casey Fields down here in Melbourne on Saturday, February the 10th, starting at the very strange time of 5:05 p.m., probably so they can run straight into that Fremantle versus Collingwood game that comes up immediately after that. But Casey Fields is an absolutely awful place to get to in Melbourne. I don't know why Melbourne plays their games there. Is just no one's going to go there. But apart from that, Melbourne do have a quite strong team, probably the strongest out of those Melbourne sides. But apparently, one of their key midfielders won't be playing this week to sort of even us up with losing Phillips.
So who's that one?
I believe it's Karen Paxman. I'm not too familiar on the names of the players from other teams, but I believe she's one of the sort of top players from their side to go along with Daisy Pearce and Elise O'Day, who are very good players as well in the midfield. So losing her, I think, will hurt them. But we don't have Phillips, so as I said, it evens it up a bit.
Looks like it might be wet in Melbourne on Saturday as well, so that should make an interesting game. Might bring it more even.
We haven't had too many wet games.
Because last year that was the game where they actually had the lightning and they had to have the brakes for it, and Brisbane rolled them. Melbourne didn't cope very well in the wet, which is really weird because don't most of you guys play during winter in Melbourne and it rains a lot?
31 and raining. 31 on the thunderstorms. A very, very odd day. It could be quite muggy. But it's Casey, so again, you don't have to...
So we may get the lightning pause again. Just like the recap of last year against Brisbane.
I think Casey is the team that...
Yeah, it is. They're affiliated with Melbourne. Yeah. It's just it's completely out of the way, but yeah. Very interesting seeing the game Melbourne versus GWS in round 1. A game that was 45-39 in the scoring, so much higher than the other games throughout the round. It really went down to the final wire as well, with Melbourne kicking not that I watched this game, but apparently right down to the wire, with the Melbourne kicking a goal in the sort of ending minutes to win it over the Giants. And obviously their star power of Daisy Pearce and Elise O'Day did most of the grunt work in the midfield. So it'll really be about stopping them, because I was just talking about moments ago about how our second-tier midfielders need to step up a little bit, and Melbourne probably has the best midfield combo with those couple of players in the league. So, yeah, we could be in for a tough day if we're still feeling the pain of having our couple best 22 players out.
Now, Jason has asked a question in the Facebook chat. How long is Erin out for?
So what happened with Erin is she has it's a minor strain, so she's definitely out for this week. They're hopeful for her for next week, but the issues come with what's happened with Cramery is that on Sunday Cramery was so she's built her load back up. She was doing it at 85% on the Sunday, and Cramery's actually strained that hamstring just again. It started to get sore again. So they're being very
that's
careful.
Unfortunate.
Yeah, they're being very careful with Erin about how they're building it up. So fingers crossed she'll be back the week after. So that's where that one's at. The other interesting thing is we actually had our first report from the Carlton-Collingwood game for kicking.
Yes, interesting that, what's his name, the new guy in charge of the MRP, only gave this one a 2-match suspension. I thought, if this was a men's league game, that this would be in for a very long stint on the sidelines. I would think 4 to 6 weeks for kicking someone in the groin. Not a good look at all. And I think, even though, it's maybe not as bad to be kicked in the groin as a woman. I mean, I can't really talk about that for sure. I'm sure it hurts for sure, but I mean, surely they should be applying the same standards for match review type situations to both the men's and women's league.
Well,
so do you think this is where empathy needs to enter into it? Like if they had a female MRP person, then they probably would have gone the 4 to 6, I reckon, Scorpus. But I reckon the boys feel the pain of the men on the ground, but perhaps can't put themselves in the ladies' shoes under the same circumstances.
Well, maybe I would have given it 4 to 6 weeks if I was MRP man.
I did find it very interesting because I was listening to that driving back from watching the SNFL. South Adelaide played Glenelg, and I thought it was kind of interesting. Triple M were actually calling the Friday night game, but they were talking about how when she taken that mark, etc., what she objected to was the fact that her shorts were, ripped, and so she lashed out with a foot. So maybe, as if we want to hit the stereotypes, they could have argued, well, her clothing got ripped. It's, perfectly acceptable for her to kick, which isn't acceptable for that to happen. But I thought it was kind of funny if they're looking at it that way. But if you look at the length of the season, though, Scorpus, a 2-game ban is equal to a 4 to 6 week.
Yeah, but the guy specifically said that wasn't the reason why he gave it 2 weeks, and that did not come into consideration at all. So if that was the reasoning, they definitely should have given it longer.
Yeah, true.
So I think to close out the cast, we will I just want to talk briefly about who we might see for changes coming into this week's AFLW game, because we'll see those this week, and I would fully expect that McCormick and Holmes will be available. At least it sounds like they'll be available. So, yeah, I'd be looking to probably...
Yeah, I'm not sure about Abby. I was trying to remember whether I could see her from training or not. She might have been... She actually wasn't running around in the injury, and I couldn't see her bike out the side bit. So she actually might be... She might have been out there at training. But McCormick, definitely. I think she will add a lot to that forward line, particularly with her defensive pressure and her ability to create space, which will... work well in the favours of for Jones and for Wallace.
Yeah, I'd also be considering Rachel Killian, who missed out from the team.
Not ready yet.
Not ready yet? But is there something with fitness or injuries?
I do know what the injury is, but I won't say. But it's a slight one. So she actually said tonight, is fingers crossed she's hopeful for next week.
Okay, well, that's fair enough. I guess then if we're looking at still a couple more injuries, then if it's just McCormick, I'd probably consider bringing out Jasmine Hewitt. I thought she was not particularly amazing or anything on debut, playing up forward. Still definitely stuff to work with, but, if we're bringing in McCormick, that's probably one area that I'd be looking to make the change. Were you thinking something similar, Nikki?
She's our tall forward, though, because we're playing Perkins at centre half forward.
Yeah, that's why I wanted Killian in the side too.
I know, so do I. So I think at the moment Hewitt's possibly likely to still remain for that.
Maybe Armistead then, who is the late inclusion.
Yeah, I think it could be.
Or Sally Riley, but that'll be controversial because she's co-vice.
Yeah. I think she does provide a lot of leadership on the field, but I think she was a little lost in the midfield. I think we did make some changes down back, and she got pushed back a bit more, and she was a lot better there. But, yeah, it is a bit interesting because the forward line, for me, actually wasn't too bad. It was the way the others... So I wouldn't want Jones to go
definitely.
out. I wouldn't want Wallace to go out, and yet they're very similar players to McCormick.
Yeah, I mean, I think while, Eloise Jones only got 4 touches, she definitely has a lot to work with there. That's why I was sort of hoping that, with Killian and Holmes, if they were available, then, omitting someone like Hewitt, Riley and Armistead would have been fairly, fairly easy to do those sort of changes. But just as the way it stands, I guess we've only got to work with the personnel we have. So I think it probably will be Armistead coming out from McCormick, just considering how we selected last week.
Yep, that sounds about right. Because Abby's been training as a midfielder, not as a forward.
Yeah, which is good because we need more in the midfield. And she was quite creative in the half forward. Yep. So I guess
I was just going to say she's what we miss, because Abby's able to find time. I know a lot of people don't like her because she's not flashy. She should be doing more, etc. But she was one of the best in the AFLW last year in terms of her decision-making and being involved in scoring moments. She makes the right decision and she holds onto that ball and creates space so she can hold onto it until she can give it to a good, free player.
Yeah, so we were definitely missing her, and hopefully we'll see her in a couple of weeks. But yeah, I think that probably does it for our look at the AFLW and for the Wednesday edition of the CrowCast as we continue this throughout the AFLW competition up to the main season. Anyone got any final words before we sign off for the evening?
Just on Fremantle game, apparently, I think you were saying 54,000 tickets sold.
Apparently, I mean, it's at the new Optus Stadium, $2 tickets. Obviously, lots of interest for people coming to this new stadium. The one-day international in the cricket was also a sellout, but the numbers for attendance were much lower than a sellout. So it'll be interesting to see what happens for that game that they've got on the Saturday night.
So $2 for a ticket and $12 for really awful food.
Yeah, doing well over there in Perth.
No matter what attendance they get, it's going to be a great thing for the Women's League.
Yeah,
definitely.
Agree.
All right, well, thanks for joining us on this week's CrowCast, Nikki and Rabman. Hope you enjoyed yourself. How'd you find yourself going, Rabman, in the end?
I appreciate the offer to come on. I didn't, unfortunately, watch much of the women's game, so I wasn't able to comment as much as you guys, but no doubt with further into the season, I'll certainly have more to comment on. Yeah,
well, it's good to have some extra voices on the show and a couple of other opinions. Always nice to get the engagement up. So, yeah, thanks everyone for joining. And Phoenix, I guess it's over to you for the final stuff.
The final stuff, yep. Thanks everyone for listening, and thanks for those people who download us on demand, which you can do on our website, aflcrowcast.com, or of course you can access it on our Facebook page, facebook.com/AFLCrowcast. Our YouTube channel is also up, which will have replays of this show. If you wanted to subscribe to our YouTube channel, just search CrowCast. We're up on iTunes now, so you should be able to search us and find us. I think the search term that's working at the moment is AFL Weekly. So if CrowCast isn't working for you for this particular show, throw in AFL Weekly and see how you go. And 2 more weeks of you guys carrying it on your own, and then we're into Tuesday Night Live. So things are going well, and we really appreciate everyone who's listening. And of course, you can follow us on Twitter at AFL CrowCast.
Oh, and one more final thing. It was such a pleasure watching Tom Brady stuff up the NFL Super Bowl.
He's still got a number of rings, Nikki.
I don't care. He stuffed it up. It was glorious.
Righto. I'm playing the music. We're out of here.
Night all.
See you later.